Okay, works for me.
So today we're talking about the two chapters called Ethnicity and Body. And I got to tell you that when I first looked at these, I go, all right, I don't think either one of those is my issue. But as I read it, I go, oh my gosh, it kind of is, right? I watched, for example, as a first grade bilingual teacher, I watched the difference between my had been in America for a while Hispanics and my recently immigrated Hispanics, and the ways they saw each other very differently than I, who could just group them very easily into them, right? And I guess it's because everyone likes to have somebody that they can look down on, they can say is different, worse, doesn't manage it as well as what they do. But you saw his point is that we do what I did. Those are just Hispanics. Those are just blacks. Those are just whatever. And so we manipulate that to be able to make it easier for us. And it's always, of course, at their expense. So if we're going to be ethnically anti-racist, we have to, as it says in the definition at the front of the page, take care to have policies that lead to equity between those ethnic groups, whoever they are. However they appear to us. Do we racialize everyone, or do we somehow find ways to make them into individuals? Okay. My experience with my kids was that my recent immigrant kids were kind of, as he pointed out in this chapter, were more successful. Why? Because they had parents who were driving them that way. Some of my other kids who were been in the States for a while, or who were of other ethnic groups, for example, African American or white, I felt were on a trajectory more like this, and so had a more negative view of school. If not them themselves, their parents who helped less. But my kids who had recently come in, the immigrant kids, were on a trajectory upward. And so they were going to be more successful if nothing changed in that. And so my job with some of my other kids was to try to bend that arc back up and rekindle in them and in their parents something that would resurrect the script of what could happen. Those scripts that we tell they hold on for a long, long time. Okay. Last week we talked about how we first started seeing we first started seeing race, and we started seeing it in graduated who's better than who, right? Now we'd always had slaves, but it was always my country enslaving your country. That's what had happened in Africa as well. And so when we said we enslaved Africans more saw it this way. I sold you some of my slaves from that other country, and I gladly sold you those because they weren't me anyway. But what we saw at first was just, we're buying African slaves. And then we started putting labels on it because there were so many Angolans, they became less valuable as compared to the other groups.
Isn't that a terrible thing to think about, really? I mean,
horrible.
Even with human beings,
yeah.
Scarcity makes them more valuable.
Horrible. And we start putting reasons why. So-and-so is better because they have whatever reason we want to use to be able to do that, right? So how do we reverse that? And how do we reverse our tendency to like some better than others? And I think he was extremely honest about the dynamic within the Black community to do that very same type of thing. But I don't think that was in a positive way. He was saying, we've learned the lessons way too well that racism in America has taught us. And somehow we have to unlearn those lessons. How do we help people go back to that sense of where he said that immigrants are more resilient, more resourceful? How do we help expect that in all of us better than what we are right now?
I think I'm sorry for butting in again, but I sort of felt like as I was reading this that, and it frustrated me, that this is part of the same thing, at least within this country, maybe not in England or other places, but within this country, there is such a suspicion of not just science, but research. There are many people who just feel that the research is not worth anything. So that if you provide a statistic that says that recent immigrants of whatever color usually do better than any of the people who are already there, because they have something to gain to come here. There's something within their personality as far as wanting to make that change, and that we are missing out on the resources that those immigrants can bring to us, because they're better educated even before they show up. And what I want to say to people who are so down on immigration is, look, research shows that recent immigrants are people who are strong. Either they've had to be strong to travel by foot from Central America into this country, or they have been educated somewhere else and feel that there is something that they can bring to the country. But for some reason, there is a great part of our population who feels that anybody who comes in as an immigrant is somebody who can't make it somewhere else.
We had people who came through the church in the Into America project who had been international speakers.
Yeah.
Right? Experts in their fields, who had been teachers and lawyers in their countries, and who were moving not because they weren't, they didn't have plenty of resources within themselves. They were moving because they had to get to somewhere where it was safer for them.
Yes.
And yet you're right that we tend to look down on, and we tend to say they're not succeeding because they're in the space where they're at. Not succeeding, when we speak it that way, is all compared to where I'm at, not compared to where they're at and where they're going. And that was one of the big things he pointed out. I love the question he said, or the two statements that he placed next to each other. He said, an ethnic racist asked, why are Black immigrants doing better than African Americans? Comparing someone here, comparing these two groups. What he was trying to say was, we have to be the ethnic anti-racist who asks, why are Black immigrants not doing as well as other immigrant groups? Now here's the problem with that. The one puts all the onus between the two groups and trying to compare them. The other compares a group to us.
Yes.
And says, what is it that we're doing that's holding this group back in some way or another? What is it that we're not providing, or that we're giving more to that group than another group? How is it that we're making it easy for someone to succeed and someone else not to? Because one of the big points he made here is, no, regardless of where they came from, suddenly they were all racialized as Black, and they were pushed down into our definition of what Black was in America. And so we automatically had a non-honoring of those folks. What do we do to reverse that?
I'm hoping he's going to help us at the end of this book.
Yeah, I hope so too.
part of what he's going to tell you is this. He is presenting all this not to give you the right answers, but to spur you towards figuring out answers for yourself. Is this an area where you start picking up the baton and doing something about it? But he gave you some reasons to hold on to. He said the majority of Americans on welfare are not African American.
I know. Wasn't that an amazing statistic?
And you need to continually tell people that, because you have friends of yours who think that's absolutely not the truth.
Yeah.
They automatically assume something about African Americans around welfare. And we all have to continue to say that's not true.
I think the more telling statistic is the African Americans who are eligible for welfare but don't accept it.
That's exactly right.
That is an amazing statistic.
It is not that everyone's just going automatically, because that's the story, isn't it? They just want to dole on society.
Right.
But I think at least part of what he's drawing us into in all of this is he is saying you have got to see the Black world for what it is, not for the stories that you've been told it is. Harvey, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that we often overlook, we think about aid to particular groups and we think about welfare. And it's true that 39.8% of the people on welfare are Black, 38.8% are white, and the rest. But that's only one place where people get aid. By far and away, 3 times more aid goes to white people than Black people.
And tell you're exactly right, Harvey. Tell them some of those places where we get aid as white people.
How about health care? How about care for the part of Social Security? What's that called? HDMI? No, it's not HDMI.
No.
That's what I'm looking at.
FDIC.
Those are some of the places where Black people don't get nearly as much aid as white people.
That's
and
right.
when you combine the Latino people in there, oftentimes they get emergency family aid that's not the same as that category of welfare.
Yeah.
And so, there are a lot of places. And if you look at the whole picture, it adds up to about 3 times more for whites than it does for Blacks.
Yeah. Well, small business loans that are given are hugely in favor of white America.
Yeah. Housing.
Yeah.
loans.
Yeah. Housing things are also. And don't get me wrong, I think it's great. I think that most of the people who are receiving that in white America need it. But if white America needs it at that level, then guess what? We should be doing in Black America as well.
Same thing.
We need, if that is what we feel like we need to have, if I want to have that available for my small business to be able to get that loan, then my neighbor who happens to be of a darker skin tone needs to have that same ability to get that.
Or whatever thing is going to help them financially in the same way that small business loan is going to help me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's important too, because part of what he's been saying is being, I can't remember the phrase now, something about being equal in our differences or something. I can't remember how he phrases it, but it's basically, we don't have to all be the same to have equal opportunity.
You do not.
And the opportunity does not have to be in the same areas. It just has to be an opportunity to live a complete life.
Yeah. Yeah. So why is it that we deny some of us that completing a full and complete life? That's the main question he's asking, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is getting in our way of saying they should have this kind of life just like me? Is what we're striving for, isn't it? And at least one of the questions, I'm going to kind of hop towards the second chapter because they really tied together for me, is whatever story I tell about that black body in front of me. How many have ever walked down the street, coming the other direction is someone who intimidates you of a darker color, and you get that fear inside of you. It's almost impossible in America for us not to, because we've told so many stories for such a long time about how dangerous black bodies are that it's hard for us not to get that little tremble.
Well, and we see that he felt that way too.
Yes.
That's the thing that is amazing
yes.
to me.
Right?
Is that he bought into that whole mythic.
And that's because that story has been told way too long. Way too much. Early movies, and you know how much I like movies. Early movies were horrible at vilifying Black America. Huge movies like the Birth of the Nation, which was one of the first really important early movies. D.W. Griffith did that movie, and it was so denigrating to Black America, right?
Well, not only the denigration, but the characterization of the
characterization,
silly, foolish, low IQ. All those movies made back in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
And in a very real way, not just the diminished human being, but almost the bestiality of that, turning them into something not human, right? And and very often accepting this is a beast, not a man.
Mm-hmm.
And in those early movies, the inhumanity was either the dangerous side of it or the silly side. Really, that someone plays the fool, so that white people aren't afraid of them.
Yeah,
is what that side of those movies are.
So I watched an interesting movie this week that you might want to watch. It's an early Spike Lee movie called Bamboozled. Bamboozled. And so his main character is a very odd black man, okay? And he is a television executive, and he comes up with a strange idea of how to do something, and it's going back to the 30s and the 40s lyric shows and trying to resurrect that. And it's an interesting show to watch. So try to, if you get a chance, watch Bamboozled, because I think it speaks to this. It was him making money off of some of that, turning black men into beasts rather than the fullness of who they were. But how much do we do that in sports, for example? Because let me tell you my experience. So I moved down to Beeville, Texas, when I was in 10th grade, between 9th and 10th grade. And I'd known about 3 black people in my life, right?
Yeah.
Moved to Texas, and Beeville has about 10 to 12% black population. And I got to tell you, I was in awe and fear of some of these guys. They were on my track team with me, and they were incredible. Mike Johnson was our high jumper and our intermediate hurdler, and he was an impressive human being. I mean, what he could do and who he was impressive. Walter Harvey was our sprinter. Who they were, that year we did amazingly well. And my joke is that when we won district, overwhelmingly won district, it said the Trojans even scored in their weakest event, the mile run, which was me. Everyone else did amazing and well and blew the competition out. And I just got to have a little place running on the same track as these folks. And so I was truly, as a little skinny sophomore in awe and fear of these incredible athletes that I was a part of. That's not the fear that they're talking about. Those bodies that were there were fear invoking in the respect side of things. It's when we look at those same type of bodies and say, these bodies, these black bodies, always bring the negative. That's what he's talking about. That are always violent bodies, that are always worth being scared of. We tell that story a lot. I can't tell you how often some of my friends that I tell you about, that I argue with all the time, have brought up some kind of thing about, oh, I don't care about those spoiled brats in the NFL, because and they express this fear that they don't see as fear, because here's these people succeeding marvelously, and I think they just see it as at my expense.
And yet, African Americans had to fight a long time to be able to include it in professional sports.
To even be included, huh?
Yes, yes.
Right?
So, you know, it's awfully easy to forget that because we've seen them excel for so long. But, you know, we need to keep remembering that they had to make a big push just to have one or two people introduced in it. I would like to also bring up the statistic that he had as far as the violence from young black people, because there's one statistic that says that young blacks are far more likely to be convicted of all of these crimes. When they included people who were employed, that statistic just turned on its head, that it was very evenly divided between blacks and non-blacks at that point, as far as how much crime and everything. So I think that this is a good place where this is something that we can do, because finding employment for these young people is what's going to get them off of this violent track.
That is exactly right. And that's one of the things that I really want you to take out of this, because this is where you can really do something. Things like Job Path here in Pima County is an organization specifically designed to help do that, to bring employment opportunities, to help people step into a role where they can come out of that space which causes violence, that space of poverty and neighborhoods where it's hard to escape from, and suddenly get them into a space where they become the best of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy for us to blame black instead of blaming poverty.
I know.
Instead of blaming the jobs, because if there's not jobs, that's at least partially our responsibility, isn't it? Does our economy here in Pima County do something so that there are jobs for all of our folks?
I think this is a way we could get people who have something of a racist bent to at least go along with the policy, that this is something that they could see is helping.
Yes.
And that even though they still have these feelings, these racist feelings, that they could help people get jobs, because they know that helping people get jobs will make a difference.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not trying to convince them that blacks are equal with whites, because they'll probably never believe that. But they will believe, you know, that people having a job might help protect their community.
That's right. Well, and what it will do is at least this, Pam. I may not believe that all blacks are nonviolent, but Joe, who works for me, sure is a good man, and I trust him.
Yes.
Right. And sometimes
Yes.
it takes that personal, this man that I know changes at least part of my view of the rest of the world.
The problem is getting over the fear of not even wanting to be near those people, because they are afraid that they're beasts and they're violent.
Yep, that's right.
And I'm sorry for using the word "those people." My
Yeah.
My sister's boyfriend, who is African American, watched a movie once where I forget who it was, and I can't remember the name of the movie. Anyway, the punchline was, "What do you mean, those people?" And so anytime we say "those people" about anybody, he teases me by
Yeah.
saying that.
And I'm glad he does, because that's the type of voice we ought to hear, because we as white America can easily forget to hear that, or easily forget to hear how it's dehumanizing.
Yes.
And to be anti-racist, we have to continually be humanizing everything around us, every person around us.
Yes.
But you know, this is where I see the structural racism is huge.
Yes.
Trying to get jobs or places that will hire somebody. Okay, so we got tough on crime, and the result was that we locked up way more as a percent of the population of particularly African Americans, but minorities in general.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Then what do? We put a box on the employment application that says, have you ever been convicted of a felony?
Right.
If you check yes, they throw that in the trash. We do background checks before we hire people to make sure they told the truth, whether or not they checked that box.
Right.
We have landlords who do background checks. Landlords now do background checks on rental applicants. And if you pop up on the background check, they won't rent to you. I mean, it's everywhere when you start looking. We're setting people up for failure.
Right. So I think what we have to do is decide, are there ways that we can counteract all that? First of all, do we go to the legislature and try to get some of those laws changed? Yep, absolutely. We should be working along with our legislators to do that. But sometimes you just have to do something different, because those laws won't change all the time, especially in a state that is more Republican led, right? Like Arizona is. Some of those Republicans will never change those laws.
That's right.
So we have to do things like Tim is doing with Kay in upstate New York, where they are providing a space of housing and a different story for folks than what it is that's out there. And we have to decide, and those are massive efforts. It's not a small bit of work.
No.
It takes time, it takes effort, it takes money, it takes bringing people together to try to make it so that we provide a different story available. If there are a lot of felons who are let out of the system, what do we do to counteract it? And sometimes we can do that directly right here by identifying jobs where we choose to very purposely hire those felons, where we choose to give spaces to people who other folks might not hire.
Mm-hmm.
But that's going to take some resources, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, education too. You know,
It's going to take some education.
Right now to release more funds. I can't tell you how many times when I was a chaplain in a juvenile jail, I saw kids grow by 3 or 4 grades in 3 or 4 months because they had learning disabilities, because they had been left behind, they had missed earlier pieces, and when they had individual attention, then they were able to excel in school, and that was part of the reason they were in jail. But the more
and
go ahead.
And we also used to provide Pell Grants to people who were in prison so that they could further their education at whatever level they happened to be in.
Right.
And then somebody said, well, those people are getting free college. That's wrong. Let's take away the Pell Grants.
Yeah.
We're taking all the support systems away from those people, and then we can't understand why they don't become law-abiding citizens.
But now you have some ammunition to help you, Peggy.
Yes.
You can say, I'm caring for the safety of my community, because those people who are educated in lower income areas, they make those neighborhoods less dangerous, and I want that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what
That's
he's
right.
telling us, isn't it?
That's
I
right.
think a lot of you know that I worked in the prison system for a number of years as medical director for the whole state of Hawaii, and also in New Mexico. So I have a lot of experience with both jails and prisons.
Mm-hmm.
And the data does show that every educational class an inmate takes, whether it's parenting skills, whether it's getting a GED, whether it's getting an AA degree, whether it's computer skills, whatever it is, how to be a parent, decreases their recidivism rates every single class they take. And it also taught me, this is sort of an aside, that when I worked in the prison system, sometimes I could tell at somebody's educational level just by the vocabulary they used. And I can remember seeing one guy and I said, "What's your education level?" And he said, "College." Then he said, "Law." And he was an attorney, but he said, "But don't tell anybody," you know.
Yeah.
And that was funny. And then another guy, I asked him his educational level, and he says, "I just got my GED here in the prison." He said, "But I've read every book in the library." And you could tell he was smarter than smart, but never had that opportunity. And it was just wonderful to see that.
Yeah.
But all of what we're talking about, you're exactly right, Kay, and thank you for bringing that really close perspective. We have to keep telling that different truth, because there's a whole bunch about the violent Black body that's out there. There's a whole bunch about how to hold people back. Even if we're not saying it in that way, there's a whole lot built into our system that allows that to be the truth. Here's some ways that we can begin to change our system. But guess who's not going to be able to do it alone? Any one of us. It means we're going to have to find how we're going to group together to try to get this done. Right? So how do we begin that?
That's the challenge.
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yep.
That's the challenge.
But it takes us deciding that this is what we're going to do and beginning to have the conversations, begin to speak. Norman's got a lot of experience over at Southside. Southside has not done any of their work because they were already organized. They've done all their work because someone stood up and began to organize people around them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And something happened because they chose to step into that role. Right, Norma? Did I say that right?
Yeah, let's see, I'm unmuting myself. Yes, you're exactly right.
So what is it that we collectively choose to do? And how do we begin doing that? I'm going to tell you, you'll find some people right now. I don't know if you know Dylan and Annie, young couple at the 1045 service. They're about to get married, by the way. They will be your hands and feet in a lot of different ways. They will step into being active as much as they can as young parents, but they want to be able to have something to do. And if you start organizing and helping it happen, folks like Dylan and Annie will step into those roles. They may not have the money to be able to do it, but if you can provide the money, they'll provide some of the time and effort.
Hands and feet.
The hands and feet. That's exactly right. If you provide some of the organization.
One of the things I think you all know that I do is open my home to the asylum seekers. And, you know, right now, Richard is living with me since June, and he's an asylum seeker from Uganda. And it was interesting in this chapter, I think Pamela was talking about the higher education of a lot of our Black immigrant population. And the 3 asylum seekers that have lived with me all were college educated.
Right.
And it's just interesting because most of us think of immigrants as uneducated. And in fact, in our program that Jim just referred to, Tim Doherty in my program in Albany, New York, most of them are uneducated, especially the women. They're single moms and they just have never had the opportunity for education. But the 3 that have lived with me here in Tucson, all from Africa, all were college educated, and many of them, they all spoke at least 4 to 6 to 8 languages, and one of them about 17. I mean, it's just
wow.
amazing.
Yeah.
And part of that speaks to what he said at one point. I knew Blackness wasn't being violent. Blackness was a constant. And so we have to look and say, because he's definitely in this section, especially as he talks about Smurf. He's not saying there is not violence in Black neighborhoods. There are not these issues. That happens. What he's saying is there's a whole bunch of the other. And we have to start turning off our fear of and moving towards so that we see human beings and help human beings, not run from whatever we've been told about this set of people
Yeah.
over here.
I like that story of Smurf when Smurf pulled a gun on him and he was scared to death, but he laughed it off to Smurf. He couldn't admit that he was scared to death. That was just a powerful story to me.
Right. And here's the thing. Look at the Christian church in America. Some of the strongest churches in the whole country are Black churches. Often Black churches in southern cities, for example, right? Strong, powerful Christian religious fervor in who they are. And yet, if we're not careful, we write them off still as being heathens. And we forget the heathens, right?
Oh.
And we forget the power of these neighborhoods, the amazing intellect that sometimes it infuses these communities, some of the voices that have emerged out of those communities and the power they've given to the larger America. And yet we keep telling the stories about ghettos. And we have to start telling the opposite stories, the stories of wonder and power and strength. But it means that we have to stop believing what we've heard for a long time. He speaks a lot about the 1990s because, you know, much of our story in the 1990s around race was, look how violent they are. And those are still infusing us. Please don't go into that side of Chicago.
Yeah.
How much are we still telling that, or how much are we working to undo that?
I have a little story that is a positive story for the Methodist Church. I was raised Methodist in a white town in Michigan, Midland, Michigan, that was home of Dow Chemical, that didn't hire Blacks, didn't hire Jews, didn't hire Hispanics. So the whole city was really white. Nonetheless, my Methodist church was very, very inclusive and educational to all of us, especially in our MYF, our youth group. And we actually took MYF, our youth group, trips to the south side of Chicago and to the Black communities in Detroit, and had exchanges and stayed in Black families in there.
Nice.
And that's just powerful for a white community, a Methodist church, to be that liberal and forward and challenging to the youth, to make us understand. And it worked. It worked. We met many Black youth and realized they were our brothers and sisters, and no different than our white friends. And it was very powerful. But from this white Methodist church in a white community, it gave us that values.
So let me tell you how that didn't happen, Kay. It didn't happen because those youth had enough money to go on those trips by themselves. It didn't happen because they were the only ones pushing for that. It happened because a church and a lot of elders within that church chose to support that and have that as a value, right? It wasn't just one individual that chose to do that.
Our
A
youth
youth leader.
minister.
Yeah.
Our youth minister was a very much of a leader in that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it wasn't just him. He might have done that. But there were a whole bunch of other people who were saying, I support you. Here's the money to be able to do it. Here's how we're going to empower you and help you to be able, here's how we're going to go with you on these trips so that you're not doing it alone, whatever it happened to be.
Well, and then to create the link, Jim, to the Black churches.
That's right.
That was a separate jurisdiction in those days.
Yeah.
Create the link to Detroit and Chicago to create a unity with other Methodist youth, but from totally different part of the Methodist system.
That's right. And so how are we going to essentially be that for our youth? Because we have some incredible youth, don't we?
Well, the Peru trip helped.
The Peru trip did help, didn't it, Kay? One of the ways that I like doing the Peru trips is with youth and adults together.
Wonderful part. Wonderful part.
Yeah. And so we don't become separate congregations, but we see the power of who they are. And how do we continue to do that type of thing? How are you involved with our kids in some way that you truly love them, not just to be the kids that we like to look at, but the kids that you really want to help succeed, right? And it's an ongoing choice that we get to make, right?
I think that part of our difficulty with our specific church is that we are physically removed from areas of Tucson where the work needs to be done.
Yeah.
South side isn't, right? That's a good point.
That's true.
And so we have to make an even bigger effort.
Yes.
In order to communicate with those areas.
We have to be very active in doing that, don't we?
Yes.
We have to say, I'm going to take, one of the nice things about Zoom is that meetings take a whole lot less time because I don't have to travel from here to there and then be in the meeting and then travel home. Now I turn on the thing, I have the meeting. That's nice.
Yeah.
But to do some of this work, we have to do the travel time.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have
well,
to be
the
willing.
other example for St. Francis was when we kept people that were, when we had the Into America project and that we had people in our church. And that was a real powerful experience.
It was.
As it was when we had Francisco in Sanctuary.
That's right.
That was wonderful.
Yes.
Powerful.
Yes.
And the good news is we don't have to go a long, long way. If you travel down Grant Avenue and you get to Alvernon, you realize that all of a sudden you are in an area of color.
Yes, that's right.
You go a little bit further down Grant and you get to Ishkashita, and there is an amazing place right there, right? To connect into communities of color.
Yep.
But we have to travel a little bit and make the effort to say, I choose to. And maybe the hardest travel is whatever work we have to do in our head to give ourselves permission to go there and to do that. Right? Some of it's going to be, very frankly, it's going to be the body issues that he talked about in chapter 6. What do I still have internalized that make me fearful of people of poverty? What do I still tell myself about those kinds of areas? What fears will I have to overcome to move into that area? And we all have to deal with them ourselves. The good news is I know you all well enough that I know you're not trying to hold on to those fears. Doesn't mean they're not there, right?
Right.
And we have to each of us fight with whatever's there, whatever messages remain inside our heads. But it's worth it. Kay mentioned going to Peru. One of the things I like best about going to Peru is watching people who go down there very fearful because they're going into a place that they don't know at all, with people they have no clue who they are. And I watch in a week absolutely deep friendships appear.
Yeah.
But it means they have to get past the fears that they have, whether it's about language or about culture or about country or whatever it is. But it happens, doesn't it, Kay? Happen deeply.
I still communicate with David Eschenbach on a weekly basis, you know.
Good.
He's still in Peru.
He is. He is. By the way, I should tell you, I just got a call from a text thing from two of my best friends from the first time I went down there. Their names are Oldemar and Lucy. Oldemar and Lucy have been really good friends for about 15 years now. And in this COVID crisis, Lucy has lost her mother, her father, and her brother to the disease.
Oh my goodness.
Oh.
Oh my goodness.
Right? So please keep them. And those are not the only losses at the refuge. There's been most everyone there that has had some family member lost too.
Oh,
Wow.
so sad.
This is in Peru.
Mhm.
This is out in the rainforest of Peru, a city called Pucallpa.
Okay,
And
yeah.
so they're definitely, and it's a poorer city in a lot of ways. They're definitely in a place where they cannot isolate. We forget how,
Yeah.
even though it's hard for us to isolate,
Crowded.
it is
Mhm.
possible for us to do it. It
Yeah.
is not possible for a number of different reasons to easily do that. And so folks are going out and more easily becoming exposed. So.
Mm.
So what do we do to reverse the trends? At one point he said, no wonder the black body had to be lynched by the thousands, deported by the tens of thousands, incarcerated by the millions, segregated by the tens of millions. How do we start reversing all of those trends? And it could be any one of them, because you're not going to solve them overnight like that. But the incarceration of black and brown bodies is endemic in the United States right now, isn't it?
Yes.
And it'll take a lot of work, legislative work, as well as humanitarian work to reverse that trend. But it starts with an idea, and then it becomes the community that rallies around that idea. So which of those is yours? I'm guessing that you're not gonna today stop your neighbor from lynching a black man, because it doesn't feel like we're doing that as much. Although, have you noticed the uptick in the last couple of months? Just yesterday in rural Iowa, a black man was found burning alive.
Oh my God. Oh.
Yeah. Wow.
That's not going to be our.
Are we trying to repeat the 1920s?
Sometimes it feels like it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
But it does take us being present in people's lives, and we can easily find some of those lives. We can find some of them on Facebook where people are screaming racial generalities that could become, and if we are not speaking into those spaces, they're gonna just grow. And that's the person who at some point or another gives himself permission to go and to lynch somebody in whatever
I
way.
actually have a friend who's my age, who was 1950, was forced to stand and watch as his father was lynched.
Yeah.
I didn't hear you,
But-
Harvey. He was forced to what?
Stand and watch as his father was hung, as he was lynched.
Yeah.
And that was in Oklahoma. This was
Yeah.
in Deep South.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of thing is just unimaginable.
Yeah.
It feels like it, but obviously something is still happening that way. And sometimes I think it's because we choose not to speak when somebody starts down a path like that.
Yeah.
And,
We
and
need to
sometimes, you know
put
why we
more
choose not to
emphasis.
speak? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think that we should take part in emphasizing and spreading the word about some of the excellent things that people of color do.
Absolutely.
I'm from Atlanta, and the basketball team in Atlanta, the mention a while ago about the NFL players being spoiled rats. The NFL players the NBA players in Atlanta have designated their arena, their basketball arena, as a voting place in Atlanta because so many people in Atlanta were not allowed to vote because it was too late in the day. So they're going to have 100 or more voting places inside the basketball arena. And this was begun by the African-American players on the NBA there.
Yeah. What an amazing thing.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, we hear so much negative. I think we need to really emphasize and spread the word about the positive things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And doing that, we would have to look and see how is it that voting in Tucson is going, and is there going to be a difficulty in different neighborhoods, and if there are, do we step in to help in those neighborhoods in some way or another, giving rides to people to the polling places, overcoming some of the obstacles that are put in place. I haven't heard of that yet, but is that one of the things we could step towards? The difficulty is that it doesn't just go away. We have a lot of years of stuff
for
built up.
decades.
And
Generations.
and not just the outside stuff, a whole bunch of stuff inside of people's heads.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the only way this stuff goes away is if we choose to get to this space with people, right? My friend Dean is a pain in the butt.
Good old Dean.
Oh my gosh, some of the stuff he posts. And I just keep staying there with him, and I say, why are you afraid of conversation with me? He's an intelligent man, and he's a good-hearted man, but he has so much stuff built up, which is what most of the people that you're going to be dealing with have. Something built up inside of themselves, which says something like, all Black bodies are worthy of fear. Or some Blacks make it, why aren't the others, right? That they're ethnically dividing the Black community, or they're bodily looking at them in some way that's making it so they get to hold on to their prejudices. Your voice as a white person in that other person's life can sometimes say, here's a different way of thinking about it. I wish I could say it would be easy and that the themes in your life just change like that. But it's worth the effort.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when he was talking about the person he encountered who was asking him where he was from, trying to imply that he was a recent immigrant from Africa, and that's why he was so well educated.
Yeah, right.
You know, that he couldn't possibly be the son of slaves, more or less, or a descendant of slaves. You know, and even when the person was faced with that, he made up a story in his own head where he could he could still keep his feelings about African American slave descendants and Africans from recent immigrants from Africa. He had this myth build up in his head, and he had to find some story that would keep that together, even when he was confronted with evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
Yep.
I love the
That's great.
story, though, that he told of the one student who kept preaching, right?
Yeah.
And how he just stayed in communication. He just stayed there, kept asking questions, kept drawing him towards a space where he had to admit something different than the story that was just in his head.
Yep, that was a
Yes.
good one.
And that's what we have to do. The stories are in our head for whatever reason. We have to drag them out of those stories, ourselves as well as the other people.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? We have to start telling better stories about ourselves in this world. And those stories are there. There's much better stories than that. It's already very apparent for us if we'll allow it to sink into us deep enough that we believe them. And it's going to take even harder for it to sink into some places. Some people have their eyes very tightly shut, don't they? Don't be afraid of it, though. Keep telling the other stories. All right, thank you for your time. I appreciate you.
All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye. See you
So
next
two
week.
chapters for next week, Jim? 2 more chapters next week?
Yeah, 2 more chapters for next week. That's
All
exactly right.
righty,
So,
Yep. Okay.
see you in
bye-bye.
a week.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.